You're
Okay.
in. And then I hit OK.
Greetings and welcome to Blue Smoke and Black Ink, the podcast where you can blow off a cheap cigar if you want, or just sit back and enjoy a half-hour sit down with some of America's greatest writers. A mutual pal of ours, Joe Citro, and I agree that we'd like to spend about 5 minutes inside the mind of this week's guest, Steve Bissette. It would be like a warehouse, a million square foot warehouse of awards and honors and horrors and stalactites and stalagmites and trapdoors and secret passages. But Citra and I both agree 5 minutes would be enough. It's just overwhelming, as this guy is overwhelming. Let me introduce him to you. There he is. Hi, Steve. How you doing?
Jim, how are you doing this morning?
Oh, very good, very good. I want to tell you, when I knew we got you on as a guest, I started jotting down different topics we could talk about of things you've done. And I ran out of paper. It's just too many things. So I started organizing them. And I organized them into the following sections. We don't have to follow this at all. This is your show. Do what you want.
No,
But
this
if
is
we have a
your
chance,
show. This is
no, it's
your
yours.
show.
Nah. I want to talk to you as a cartoonist, as a prose writer, as a movie critic, which is one of the best I've ever heard, as a school teacher, as a collector, and anything else. But let's start with the cartoonist and this book here, Tyrant. I want to tell you, I'll stop talking in a second,
No,
Steve.
no, no, go, go. I love this.
Somewhere in the condo I'm living in right now, I have an original copy of Tyrant magazine. I've looked for it 10 times, opened up a lot of plastic boxes, and still can't find it. But tell us, what's the story behind Tyrant? What is it? How did it come to be? And are you proud of it?
Well, I'll start with, yeah, I am proud of it. Tyrant was my dream project as a writer and as a cartoonist. When I was 4 years old, the first drawing I did that an adult recognized as what I had in my head was of a dinosaur. I love dinosaurs. I've never outgrown my love of dinosaurs. And I was always frustrated growing up that any dinosaur comic book I bought, any dinosaur movie I caught on TV, any dinosaur anything, uh, would always have people in it, right? Like I didn't want people in the way of my dinosaurs. And I also grew up reading a lot of animal fiction. I, I I was of that generation where we had the Scholastic Book Club, where in elementary school, junior high, high school, every month you got this like 4-page catalog, and I used to buy and read a lot of animal novels, dog novels, horse novels. It was a genre of young person's fiction, but nobody had done a dinosaur book in that format. So Tyrant grew out of that, to be honest with you.
Oh,
And
great.
as I got older, I pitched it to various publishers. Once I was working professionally in the field as of 77, I would occasionally pitch the idea to publishers, and they would always come back with something like it. When I was working at DC, there was a proposal for something that turned out to be a time travel story, and I tried to do a dinosaur story for an editor at Marvel, and she turned it into a science fiction piece about an evil man trying to wipe out all African Americans. They all wanted to get the dinosaurs out of it. So once I had the money, Jim,
Yeah.
um, I self-published Tyrant. I did my own project. So what it was to be was going to be the birth, life, and death of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. But the whole market, the whole direct sale market that comic book stores were thriving within, imploded in the mid '90s, and I only got 4 issues out before the market forces led me to pull the plug on the project.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Let me read you the inscription here. You sent a copy, a newer copy of it.
that's Paleo Pop, which is a book series I'm doing collecting all my writings about prehistoric pop culture,
So
movies,
this won't only
fiction.
be about a tyrant. It'll be about all of your
Well,
uh,
it's about all dinosaur, everything, right?
okay.
So, dinosaur movies, dinosaur comics, but in about, I would say, in about 2 months' time, the books will be shipping from a new publisher I'm working with, Lighthouse Publications, and they have collected the complete 4 issues of Tyrant into a giant, oversized book the size of my original art, all scanned from my original art, and a companion volume called Tyrant: The Complete Edition, which collects almost all my dinosaur anything I ever did in comics,
Wow,
stories, drawings,
where's the
everything.
best place viewers can get that book when it comes out?
Well, you can still go on Kickstarter and you can still pre-order. If you Google Kickstarter Bissette Tyrant, and Bissette is Bissette, it'll bring you to the Kickstarter page, and you can still pre-order copies of either one book or both of the books.
Oh,
Uh,
that sounds great. Yeah, double S and double T in Bissett. You have to remember that.
with
I
an E
I
on
never
the
did.
end, right?
There you
Exactly.
go. And your inscription to me says to Jim, from one dinosaur to another, your pal Steve Bissett. So I
There you
appreciate
go.
that, Steve.
And that's
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
print on demand book series that I've been doing, Jim. And we should talk about print on demand because you've been using it as well.
I love it.
It's amazing. I'm working on that book series, Paleo Pop, with my good friend Tim Paxton, who's a book designer and a writer in his own right, no pun intended. And we've done 2 volumes so far, and we're working on the third right now.
Great. That sounds terrific. Let's go to another a project of yours, which I'd never heard of, but you're a prose writer, and is this a series of books, or would you call it magazines called Bare Bones? What's the
No,
story on that, Steve?
Bare Bones is, I'll grab a stack of them right here. Bare Bones, pardon me,
Yeah,
is not my magazine, but I'm one of the many contributors. Now, Bare Bones originally was a large format magazine, and it is co edited and was co created by Peter Infantino and John Scolari. And they revamped Bare Bones into the format I sent you, Jim. These come out roughly quarterly, but they've actually come out more often than quarterly. And they're using print on demand. You can buy them at Amazon. You just look for Bare Bones, and if you need to type in a keyword, uh, either editor's name, John Scolari is Scoleri, and it'll bring you to the whole run of Bare Bones. And what I sent you, Jim, were sample issues because I'm hoping to convince you to contribute to Bare Bones because
great.
they specialize in crime fiction. They love writing about crime fiction, and they work with writers from all around the world. A number of my friends, including, well, the writer who invited me in was David J. Scow. I've known David since probably late 80s, early 90s, and he was one of the splatter punks. If you have any vague memory of the horror movie that was
Yeah,
briefly called Splatter Punks. But
sure.
David also is a screenwriter. He was one of the writers of the Crow film, based on Jim O'Barr's comic series and graphic novel series. And David's a short story writer. He's done tons of short fiction. He was originally published, I first read him in Twilight Zone magazine, if you remember that newsstand magazine.
Yeah.
So, anyway, David has been a contributor. He has a regular column in Bare Bones, and he leaned on me for years, like, Steve, you should be contributing. And I had already become friends with John Scolari, pen pals, and so I started contributing. And they also have, if people want a one stop, there is a best of Bare Bones volume that's available that collects some of their favorite articles and interviews from the earlier issues, and it's a lot of fun.
I,
They pay a little bit. But you keep the copyright, and I've written for them a whole series of articles about TV westerns that featured fake monsters in them. They published my article on point of view uh, shots in horror and crime films, where the camera would be, you know, the viewer is looking through the eyes of some unseen character.
yeah.
Um, and I've done articles for them on the Jungle Jim movies of the 1950s, the ones with
Oh,
Johnny
yeah.
Weissmuller. And I'm working on some new articles for them right now. My friend Doug Winter writes for them. My novelist friend Stephen Laws in the UK has been writing for Bare Bones. Tim Lucas, who's an old friend of mine, Tim and I have been doing a lot of bonus features for Blu-ray and 4K editions of favorite films. They're all contributing to Bare Bones, and Jim, I think Jim DeFilippi belongs in Bare
Oh,
Bones.
I'd love to. Yeah, send me sometime the information on that. Love to. But when you say contributing, Steve, you're not contributing any artwork to this series. It's all prose. Is that
I've been
correct?
working with them as a writer,
Okay.
but John Scoleri is trying to collect all the still extant original art I had done back around 1989-90 for a project that was going to be an adaptation of the film Night of the Living Dead. And I left the project for a variety of reasons, but I had done a number of pages and I had done 4 or 5 covers,
Oh,
full painted black and white covers. And John has been trying to corral all that art that's out there.
wow.
I didn't hold on to any of it. So, eventually I may end up in there as an artist. But I know that one of John Scalari's pet projects that he's doing with his imprint that Bare Bones is published under is some kind of definitive book on Night of the Living Dead. So I imagine my artwork will end up in that.
Oh,
So,
that's terrific. And before we get into your prose instead of your artwork, everybody's heard about Swamp Thing. Now, what's your relationship to Swamp Thing? Tell us about that, Steve.
well, despite what's been said in various Vermont newspapers, I did not co-create Swamp Thing. I was a sophomore and junior in high school when Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson first created Swamp Thing, and Swamp Thing #1 came out when I was in my either late junior or early senior year at Harwood Union High School in Duxbury, Vermont. So Swamp Thing was a favorite comic book that I used to buy off the racks and read in the early 70s. And then around 1980 or 81, the filmmaker Wes Craven, the man best known these days for Scream and A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Sure.
But back then, he was best known for an infamous, sordid little movie called Last House on the Left.
Yeah.
Um, he got the gig to direct a film adaptation of Swamp Thing, and it was released by Avco Embassy Pictures. And it was right when they were having a management change. The people who had owned Avco Embassy had had huge success with a number of horror movies that you may remember, Jim. I know you're not a horror movie buff, but you will remember titles like Scanners, the David Cronenberg film, The Howling, the Joe
Yeah.
Dante film based on the Gary Bradner novel, um, Phantasm. So they were producing more horror films, including borderline horror movies like Escape from New York, John Carpenter's Kurt
Oh,
Russell
yeah.
movie. And then they sold the company. And by the time Swamp Thing was ready to be released, there was new management that didn't want to be making horror movies. So they dumped Swamp Thing. But before that happened, DC Comics, in their infinite wisdom, revived the comic book series Swamp Thing and began publishing a new series called Saga of the Swamp Thing. And the artist on that series from issue 1 was one of my classmates from the Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art. I was a member of the first ever class at the Joe Kubert School in Dover, New Jersey. And Tom Yates got the gig. And Tom was doing all the pencils and inks. In the comic book industry, Jim, Marvel, DC, Archie Comics, the mainstream companies will divide the labor so that you have one writer and you have one pencil artist who takes the script and converts it into pencil comic pages. And then you have a letterer who letters them based on the script. And then you have an inker who inks those pages and another person who's the colorist. They break it up. It's sort of like assembling an automobile at an
Yeah.
automobile plant. And Tom Yates, though, was doing the penciling and the inking. And the book was behind schedule when they started. So John Tottleman, another one of our classmates, Rick Veach, one of my oldest friends, and also one of my Kubert School classmates, and I would occasionally pitch in and help Tom Yates on making Deadline. And when Tom decided he was going to leave the book, he suggested that John Tottleman and I work up some samples, and he delivered them to his editor, Len Wein, who was the writer who originally co-created Swamp Thing. Len liked our work, and John Toddleman and I got the job to take over the art chores on
Oh,
Saga of the Swamp Thing, starting with issue 16 back in 1983. And I was the penciler. It was my job to take the script and convert it into penciled comic book pages. And then I would FedEx the pencil pages to New York City to my editor. And John Toddleman in Erie, Pennsylvania, would get the pages after they were lettered by John Costanza, who lived in New Jersey. And John would ink the pages. It was this
wow.
crazy process, Jim.
Is
Um,
it frustrating to work like that for you, Steve? Would you rather, this specialization of labor, would you rather sit down and handle all five steps yourself? I bet you would.
Well, that's what Tyrant was, Jim. I mean, once I had the
Yeah.
money and the means, Tyrant was my baby. I did everything. I wrote
Uh-huh.
it, I lettered it, I penciled and inked it. I put together the boards, sent them to my printer, who was up in Canada at that time, printing, print and litho. And yeah, I love doing the whole job, but
I
I'm
thought
very
so.
slow. My middle name is Glacier. So, I'm very slow. I have frustrated many of my friends with my slow progress, but I've ended up doing a lot of work,
Yeah, you
so
sure
I
did.
can't be that slow. So,
Yeah, no, I don't think slow is the first adjective that pops into our mind. One thing that's amazing me here, Steve, is that as we both grow older, and I'm older than you are, I start losing, snatches of things. I can never come up with proper names. Proper names are blanks to me. And you've just rattled off at least 50, 60 proper names. You had no idea we'd be talking about this, but I just think that's terrific. Getting on to you as a prose writer, did you really win the Bram Stoker Award for a novella called Aliens?
yeah,
Is that
yeah,
true?
I got contracted by Dark Horse Comics. They decided they were going to get into doing novella, hardcover short novels, novellas, and I was contracted to write an original Aliens novella called Aliens Tribes. And this again goes back to the Kubert School, Jim. One of John Tollivan's classmates at the Kubert School was Dave Dorman. I was good friends with Dave Dorman. He's very famous in Star Wars fandom because he paints a
Oh,
lot of cover art for the comic book series and some of the book series. And Dave Dorman was the one who suggested me to editor Randy Stradley. Steve's a pretty good writer. I had only had one piece of fiction published up to that point in time. My first piece of fiction was published in a book called Words Without Pictures, edited by Steve Niles, who's a very, very prolific writer of horror graphic novels and comics. And but Dave Dorman and Randy Stradley thought I was the guy for the job, and I wrote to the contract. They give you a word count with the contract, so
sure.
I completed an original Alien story, and this was about, let's see, this was 1992, so it was about 6 years after the successful release of James Cameron's Aliens, the first sequel to Alien.
Yeah.
And it was kind of in one of those corporate dead zones, Jim, where there was nobody in charge of the franchise at 20th Century Fox, but they would have to approve everything I did. And I did an early draft that I delivered, and somebody at Fox objected that I made the alien queen too intelligent. Part of the novella was written from her point of view. Like she's put a new hive into this space station, and she's sending her warrior alien ants out to do battle. And somebody objected at Fox, so I sent a fax saying, well, how intelligent are the aliens, right? Because we only had two movies to go by, and I thought they seemed pretty freaking smart. They outwitted us.
Yeah.
And I get a fax. Like I'd already finished the next draft, and I get a fax after the fact saying, and I am not kidding. It was one sentence, Jim. It said, "The aliens are as intelligent as a large dog." And I'm thinking, well, I've known a lot of large dogs, and some are really smart, and some are really
Yeah.
dumb. Like this doesn't really answer my question. So
Wow.
I went ahead and wrote what I wanted to write, and
And won an award.
well, before that, in the 11th hour, and you probably have had something like this happen or know of it, the publisher finally lays out the novella, right? The production department puts it all together. Dave Dorman did the illustrations. Um, and they went, "Oh my God, it's 10,000 words too long."
Whoa.
And I get a panic phone call saying you have to cut 10,000 words. Well, that's a significant chunk of a fiction
Yeah.
novella, right?
Yeah,
So
I
I had
do.
to cut out two entire characters who were, two of Dave Dorman's of my favorite characters. Dave had to remove the two paintings he had done with those characters and do a new
Oh,
painting. And then they sat on it for another 6 months before they published it. It was crazy. It was crazy,
geez.
But I had to turn that around in 1 week. I had one
Wow.
week to gut my novella and rewrite it. And of course, it was the 1 week in the entire 14 years that my first wife, Marlene, and I were married, that Marlene went on a vacation by herself because she hadn't done that.
Yeah.
And that's the week my publisher calls. I've got two
Wow.
kids to take care of, and I've got to bang out a brand new novella within that time. But yeah, I did end up winning best achievement in novella, and it was a split award that year, Jim. And I'm very honored to say the other winner was Joe Lansdale.
Oh,
So I felt like, wow, I guess I've arrived. I mean, I
you're
just
running
shared
with
an
the big
award with one
dogs
of the
now.
best writers working in crime and horror fiction. And then crickets. Like the publisher never promoted the award.
Hmm.
And, I wasn't flooded with offers. Do you want to write more?
Gee.
Oh, well,
But you had to cut 10,000 words. What was the novella? Maybe 60 or 50 to begin with?
Yeah, yeah, it was probably about. I don't have the contract handy. It's in my.
Oh,
You
sorry.
see those file drawers over there? It's in there.
We're going to
But yeah,
talk about you as a collector soon. But anyway,
yeah,
wow.
whatever the word count was, I had met it, and I had delivered to their specs, and then they realized, oops, and it was a big oops.
Hey, just popping into my head since we're mentioning Wes Craven and people like that. Don't you have a Steven Spielberg 1941 story that I heard years ago?
Yes.
We just talked to a guy named Gary Wolf who wrote Roger Rabbit,
Oh,
and he got to
yes.
work with Spielberg and said he's really good to work with. But what's your Spielberg story, Steve?
Well, my Spielberg story isn't just my story. It's also Rick Veitch's story. Rick Veitch and I got hired by the great John Workman, who was the art director up at Heavy Metal magazine. And John was great. I mean, he was one of my first freelance clients that I worked for. He liked my work, and he hired me, as early as 1977 to contribute to Heavy Metal magazine. I was probably among the first American freelancers who got to work for Heavy Metal because the magazine launched in, I think, January of 77. And anyway, so Steven Spielberg had a huge hit with Jaws, as everybody on the planet Earth knows. And
Yeah.
then Steven Spielberg had a huge hit with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, as everybody knows on planet Earth and probably on other planets at this point. And his next big film was going to be an epic World War II comedy called 1941. It was based loosely on an actual event where a Japanese submarine had either been sighted or was believed to have been sighted off the coast of California.
And who were
And
the stars of that movie, Steve?
oh God, it was like John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, Tim Matheson, Nancy Allen. I mean, it had a huge all-star cast, and typical of Spielberg, it was he perfectly orchestrated all these stars into this film. Um, the problem was it wasn't funny. Rick Veitch and I got the job to do the artwork for the graphic novel that Heavy Metal was co-publishing with Simon and Schuster. And it's so early in the graphic novel history, Jim, that they didn't know what to call it. So it was called 1941, The Illustrated Story, because the term graphic novel hadn't really caught on
Wow.
as yet. And they had a huge success with their graphic novel adaptation of Ridley Scott's Alien, which had been adapted by writer Archie Goodwin, and the artist was the great Walt Simonson. And that was the first graphic novel to actually land on the New York Times bestseller list for paperbacks.
Wow.
So they had high expectations for 1941, right? Steven
Sure.
Spielberg's new movie,
Yeah.
all-star cast. And as soon as we got the gig, we quickly found out the downside of working with major studios. And this has nothing to do with Spielberg directly. This was suddenly studio politics. Rick Veitch and I get called into New York to go up to the heavy metal offices. And there's a suit from either Columbia or Universal Pictures. It was a co-production between Universal and Columbia. It was such an expensive movie. Two studios had to go in on it. And this guy had slides from the set of the actors in costume and everything. And he had a script to the movie. But we weren't allowed to take any of them home with us, right? We
Wow.
were going to be working for months on this project. We had something like 4 months to complete this graphic novel in full color. This guy thought that we could sit down in a room and the slide projector would show the slides and we could do all the sketches we needed to take back to Vermont to do all the work. Now,
Wow.
John Workman, the art director, knew this was insane, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is insane. So he talked the guy into going to lunch. And while the guy was at lunch, John rushed the movie script and the slides into the production department so that Rick and I could go home with a copy of the movie script
Oh,
and black and white photo stats of the slides, right?
yeah.
But we weren't supposed to tell anybody. I'm only telling you now because the penalty of death clause in the contract is terminated. So
Wow.
that's what happened. And another writer, a writer named Alan Asherman, was supposed to do the adaptation, but he fell so far behind schedule that Rick Veitch ended up having to script a lot of the last third or so of the graphic novel. And Rick was scripting as he was lettering. He was doing all the lettering as well. So we were working by the seat of our pants this whole time. And I had kind of perfected this collage technique where I would cut photos out of slick magazines. They had to be magazines with really high resolution reproduction where you didn't see the little dots, right? And I could work over them with magic marker or watercolor or dyes and whiteout, and I would incorporate them into some of my artwork. And that's how we did 1941. That's how we made the deadline. We bought the whole year of 1941 of Life magazine at this secondhand thrift store down in Morristown, New Jersey. And we hauled them back to Grafton, Vermont, where we were both living at the time. And that was our resource. You know, we incorporated all the celebrities and all the advertising art we could from the 1941 Life magazines into this crazy piece. End of the story, and this is where Spielberg comes in. Spielberg hated our graphic novel, hated it. He wrote this letter to Julie Simmons Lynch, who was the editor at Heavy Metal and the editor of the graphic novel, saying, I'll try to paraphrase it. We all agree here that the artists are highly talented, but they have turned my zany comedy into a Hieronymus Boschian nightmare.
Oh, gee.
And he ended by saying, you know, they are talented, though. I will recommend them to my friend Francis Ford Coppola. They could maybe adapt Apocalypse Now, which hadn't come out yet, right? Um,
Oh.
and he hated it. Now, the reason we went the direction we went, Jim, is we weren't allowed to see the movie. We didn't see the movie until the New York City premiere.
Oh my
And
God.
I have to tell you, it was my first and one of the only movie premieres I ever got invited to. We're in New York City, big theater right on Times Square.
Yeah.
And the cast of Saturday Night Live were there, right? Because
Oh,
Belushi and Aykroyd were in the movie. And the movie begins, everybody's energy is up, everyone's excited, and you could feel the air just suck out of the theater as
wow.
people realize this isn't working, you know. And I know a lot of people love 1941. I know a lot of people love the movie It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. But it was pretty much like that Stanley Kramer comedy that just didn't work. It was too big and bloated, and you know.
Wow.
So there's my
Boy.
Spielberg story. He didn't love my work, Jim.
Now, that sounds amazing. I've just been notified by
Oh, we only got like a minute, right?
yeah, I have a minute or two left. So real quickly, let me hit you with a few things. Did you create the Keanu Reeves character Constantine? Is that true?
I co-created Constantine, and I did not name him. The way he was co-created, long story short, is I was fixated as a kid on Gumby. In fact, I once got to meet Gumby, as this photograph proves, right?
You
I
don't
got
mean
to
Eddie
meet
Murphy,
Gumby.
you mean Gumby.
I mean Gumby, man. And so John Tollivan and I, when we were drawing Swamp Thing, long story short, we had a running joke between us that we could not put in Swamp Thing. And the running joke was if I was doing a comic job, I would put graffiti that says Toddleben eats shit somewhere in the background. And if John was doing a comic story, he would put Bissette eats shit somewhere in the background. Now, we couldn't do that in Swamp Thing, right? Because you couldn't use the word shit. So we decided we'll start drawing Gumby into every issue of Swamp Thing. But our editor, Len Wein, got hip to what we were doing. And I got this really threatening phone call one day. I thought I'd lost my job at Swamp Thing. I pick up the phone. This is before digital phones, so you didn't know who was calling. The phone would ring, you'd pick it up. Remember those days, Jim?
Oh,
And
yeah.
I pick up the phone, and it's Len Wein's voice. And Len usually would be very chipper and say hello first. He didn't say anything. He goes, "You are playing a very dangerous game, young man." And I'm like, "Oh no, I'm too late with the pencils. I'm going to get fired." And it was Gumby. It was Gumby. He had
Oh,
spotted
that.
Gumby, and he's like, "You guys can't keep doing this." So I was like, all right, Len." So I called my buddy John Toddleben, who was the other artist on Swamp Thing, and we both decided on the spot, okay, we got to put somebody in that Len doesn't know, that he won't recognize. And John Toddleben was a big fan of the relatively new band Police.
Oh,
And we
yeah.
both liked the look of Sting. He had been in a couple of movies. Brimstone and Treacle, John Toddleben reminded me, was the one that we both kind of gravitated to. So we snuck Sting into the background
Okay,
of
not as
crowd
good as
scenes.
Gumby, but not too bad.
Yeah,
Hey,
exactly.
hey,
And we
yeah.
we let the writer, the new writer on the series was Alan Moore, and we said to Alan Moore, "You better make him a character because we're never going to stop putting him in." And Alan created John Constantine based on our drawing Sting in the background of Swamp Thing.
Oh,
And
that's great.
legally, this meant that John Tolleben and I were co-creators of John Constantine because
Yeah.
we had drawn him first. Luckily, Rick Veitch, who drew the first issue where John Constantine was named John Constantine and where he was a full character, Rick also now gets a cut of the royalties for John Constantine. We all
Oh,
get like a fraction of 1%, but it
well,
adds up, man. Every
yeah,
quarter
it
we
sure
get a
does.
little check for John Constantine.
Oh, that's great. Steve, this has been so great. I hate to cut you off. The things I was going to talk about is that your years as a teacher at the Center for Cartoon Studies there in Vermont. I'm sure you enjoyed that.
Yeah,
I
I did
want
it for 15 years. Not as long as you taught, though, Jim.
No, I can double that. But I
Yeah.
also wanted to talk to you and people looking in the background of your shot as a collector. You collect stuff, don't you? I know every 3 or 4 years, yeah, don't you wipe everything out and start again?
No, no, I'm still, I mean, I'm 71 now, so I've accumulated many decades of, well, I'll
Yeah.
call it stuff.
Oh, that's great.
I'll call it stuff.
Steve Bissette, thank you so much. It's great talking to you. I want to remind our viewers that they should like, they should subscribe, they should comment. For if people who are hard of hearing, there's a great little button called transcript on YouTube that you can hit. This should be up on Saturday, Steve, and I think it's just going to be great. So you look after yourself, mate. Thank you so much.
Jim, you take care of yourself. Bless you and your family. And thanks for inviting me on board. If you ever want me on again, I'm your man. But
Uh,
I got to get you into bare bones. You got to be
yeah,
ready for
sounds
bare
good. Yeah,
bones,
give me
man.
the info on that.
We'll get you in there.
So long, Steve.
Thank you, Jim. Take care.